George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Thousands are dead in the priceless treasure called Morocco in an earthquake. Thousands more injured and many, many missing. May God have mercy on the souls of the departed and preserve those digging in the rubble where today they found a newborn baby still alive. And the Queen is 12 months dead. The Queen is dead, but does the King live for very much longer? Politically speaking, of course, I mean. I wish him a long life as plain Charles Windsor. And the Emperor is definitely dead. Macron has an entire stadium as he kicks off the Rugby World Cup in Paris, and it all goes pear-shaped. Well, the shape of a rugby ball in any case. East Palestina still doesn't have clean water following the derailment of a toxic train there more than 6 months ago. But Joe Biden's going to build a railroad right across the continent of Africa. And of course, we'll be talking about Elon Musk, the man that saved the world. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. It is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
The Queen died exactly 12 months ago, and King Charles, who'd been waiting rather longer than he probably had fancied, stepped into her shoes. Judging by our poll tonight, a year on from the Queen's death, has King Charles filled her shoes? Not many believe that he has. Ham-fisted, to say the least. Thick-tongued, to say the least. Stupid, well, many people think so. His endless devotion to the World Economic Forum, to Charles Schwab, and to every piece of greenery, quackery, and wokery known to man, woman, or indeterminate, has not endeared him to his subjects. Neither has the massive pay increase that he has pocketed without so much as a by your leave or a single blush. And his decision that Camilla, his second wife, whom he promised would never be queen, to now dub her the Queen of the United Kingdom, Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and such remaining dominions that carry his face on their stamp, have been told that she is Queen Camilla. Not many takers for that one, even fewer actually than for the kingdom of King Charles. Has he filled her shoes? Well, my good friend Scouser Lar up in Liverpool, of all places, says yes, entirely. We now have a second parasite living off the public purse for doing not very much. And he has a point, at least so far as Charles is concerned. The Emperor, Emmanuel Macron, had the gall, who advises these politicians, to go out onto the pitch, to a podium, to kick off the Rugby World Cup, even though he knows that at least 75% of the people of France despise him, only to be booed and jeered by what sounded like every last one of them. His remaining 25% supporters were clearly not present in the Stade de France, because every French voice was raised and they roared, not the Marseillaise, but "Get out of here, you bum," at little Macron. The people despise these regimes. The German regime fell this week to 17% support in the public opinion polls in Germany. And I'm wondering who those 17% could possibly be. In France, in Germany, in the United Kingdom, where we have a prime minister constantly on the road, draped in garlands of flowers, genuflecting to Indian potentates everywhere he turns. I saw him on his knees to Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh, the dictator of Bangladesh, just a few minutes before coming on air tonight. Rishi Sunak, or as Americans will know him, Rashid Sunak, is a nowhere man. John Lennon could have written that song about him. The question is, when will the men in grey suits in the Conservative Party make a decisive move against him? Or have they decided that they are going to go quietly into the good night of a Keir Starmer landslide that may well keep the Tories out of power for a decade or more? Joe Biden actually went to a podium in front of all the journalists and grandees of Vietnam today and said, "It's evening in Vietnam, isn't it? You remember the film?" he said, "Good morning, Vietnam." Well, it's good evening, Vietnam. A note to younger viewers, Good Morning, Vietnam, starring the late and great Robin Williams, was a film about the United States' illegal and annihilating invasion and occupation of Vietnam, in which millions of Vietnamese were slaughtered by the high-powered weaponry of the United States of America, of which Joe Biden is, for good or ill, the latest president of the Republic. Instead of coming on his knees in obeisance, seeking forgiveness from the people of Vietnam, Joe Biden danced on their graves. The only saving grace could possibly be that he had no idea where he was and what was the import of what he was saying. He'd just come from the G20, in which he mispronounced the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the United States' erstwhile closest ally, rapidly receding in its friendship from the United States, just frozen its production of oil in direct collaboration with the Russian Republic. A deal hammered out on the phone between Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and President Vladimir Putin. He went on to say that bin Salman would not be speaking today at the conference, even though he'd actually already spoken. And his speech and the words therein, the warnings therein, had clearly gone over the head of senile Joe. Every day I look at videos that make it more obvious to me than it was the day before that the Democrats cannot possibly be thinking seriously of running this man, not this November, but next November, for another 4-year presidential term. You've heard of the gang that couldn't shoot straight. Joe Biden leads the gang that cannot walk straight, cannot walk up aircraft steps, cannot walk upstairs, downstairs, or along a platform in the right direction at the right time. It must be a game. They must be planning to anoint someone else. and it sure as hell can't be Kamala Harris. The New York Times asked today, why is Joe so unpopular? Like anybody needs to ask that question. But in the small print, it became clear that if Joe is so unpopular, Kamala is even more unpopular. And so a wild card must be being prepared. Some are speculating it'll be Michael Obama, but she's gone off with an apparent state of distress following the revelations, if they be so, in the Tucker Carlson interview with the man who claimed he twice had sex and crack with the soon-to-be President of the United States, then Illinois State Senator Barack Obama. In the wake of the publicity about Barack Obama's sexuality, Michael Obama fled to Spain to live with a friend of theirs and his husband, which doesn't sound to me like the kind of thing you would do when you were just about to announce that you're running for the nomination. To put Barack Obama, this time as the missus, back in the Lincoln bedroom or wherever else she'd make him sleep. That all sounds far-fetched to me. So some other wild card must be being prepared. Perhaps it's the governor of California who has turned the Sunshine State rancid, with scarcely a store left unplundered by feral mobs who have decided, as mobs tend to do, that the offense of shoplifting is no longer on the statute book, that the emaciated police forces of California are incapable or maybe unwilling to intervene. It's not that they're out on the street checking the endless lines of publicly defecating citizens on the streets of Los Angeles. It cannot be that the police are otherwise busy clearing the tent cities that are the fruits of the Sunshine State's endless Democratic Party governance in the state. Mind you, it could be worse. You could be on the streets of Philadelphia, which are alive, barely, with zombie-like figures, staggering in various states of stupefaction, hooked on fentanyl and other opioid substances, living homeless, jobless, and hopeless. Such people must have perked up at the promise made by Joe Biden that he's going to build a railroad right across the African continent. With what? Not with the increasingly worthless American Treasury bonds. Saudi Arabia alone in the last 3 months has ditched $80 billion worth of US bonds. China is doing the same. The stark, brazen worthlessness of American paper currency is ever more vividly exposed. Who's going to build this railroad across Africa? Why don't you just get off the backs of the people of Africa and let them build their own railroad with a partner, China more likely, that has already built thousands of kilometers of railroad in the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa and elsewhere. But the empty hollowness of the Democratic Party has not stopped them moving might and main to crush the possibility of humiliating defeat for Joe Biden in the Iowa caucus primaries coming up in just a few months' time in the winter snows. Not only have they pulled out of the early caucuses in New Hampshire, in Iowa, they have said that anyone who does participate in those primaries will have any delegates that they win as a result of those primaries will be null and void and will not be counted at the convention. And the worm is beginning to turn. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who will surely win those primaries in a landslide, has said that he will now have to look again at his plan to be the Democratic Party's candidate when the election comes along. And so he well might, so he well should. A third party candidature, or even a switch to the Republican Party, giving him, I'm certain, second place at least in the race to be the Republican nominee, guaranteeing him a place on the ticket. Trump, Kennedy, unstoppable, unbeatable. That's the way to go if you want to derail the toxic train that is the Democratic Party of America. I have time only to deal with one other matter, but it is a weighty one indeed. I won an award this evening, which I must share with my first guest, Garland Nixon. But I'm going to make an even more substantial award to Elon Musk. My usual caveat: I've never met the man. He's not the sort of fellow I could ever see myself hanging out with. But I believe that Elon Musk is the man that saved the world. And more importantly for him, having saved the world, his card is now marked, his businesses in grave danger, and his life perhaps under threat. When Elon Musk refused to extend the coverage of Starlink being provided free of charge to the Ukrainian military, to the area above the Russian naval fleet in Sebastopol, when he refused to be a party to a Pearl Harbor style attack on the massed fleet of the Russian Navy, he saved the world. Because if that attack had happened, if the Russian Navy, like the American Navy at Pearl Harbor, had been decimated, then a state of war would immediately have existed. Not between Russia and Ukraine, but Russia and Ukraine and all of its allies who had made that Pearl Harbor attack possible. He didn't switch off Starlink over Sebastopol, as hundreds of mendacious journalists have spent all week lying about. He just refused to extend the normal free coverage that he was giving to the Ukrainian military to absolve himself, at least, of any responsibility of the consequences, almost certainly in the end nuclear consequences of such a dastardly attack. It would have been a day that lived in infamy for Russians, in the way that the attack on Pearl Harbor still resounds in the minds of the people of the United States. In so doing, he was immediately placed on the target list of those who have murdered so many good people, journalists, the children of philosophers, that's right, poets, writers, murdered on the kill list of the death squads of the Ukrainian regime. But all this happened months ago. Why has it now been resurrected? I'll tell you why. Joe Biden made it very clear, well, as clear as anything ever is from Joe Biden. It was halting, it was stuttering, it was stammering, it was subliterate, to be sure. But it was an unmistakable warning that the United States intended to move against Elon Musk and move over these months. They definitely have. His SpaceX business, his Starlink business, his Tesla business, his Twitter business are all under full spectrum attack from agencies of the United States government, its satraps in the European Union, and so-called N, so-called G, so-called O NGOs in the United States. The most significant of which is the Democratic Party Front Organization, the so-called ADL, which defames all in the name of being anti-defamation. Elon Musk, about whom I'll talk to my fellow award winner, Garland Nixon, in just a minute. Stay tuned. It is the mother of all talk shows. Let's hear from Mehdi. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, George. Thank you very much for taking my call. This is such an honor because one thing I want to tell you is in 2003, I thought that you, I'll say it, I thought you were a prattling liberal idiot. 20 years later, I'm here honored to speak to you to say live on air, I'm sorry, I should have listened to you back then. You're bringing the truth to what's going on out there. And one of the things is U.S. policy, whatever it is now, is our government. The problem is that it's run by people with absolutely no honor. They have no shame in what they will do to accomplish what they want. And I really think part of what's going on, that's driving what's going on in Ukraine, is that it's the possibility of all the corruption that it will uncover that has happened there with the influence of our country and NATO since 2014.
Yeah. You spoke extremely powerfully and very graciously, and I'm grateful for it. But you put your finger on, I think, something that's been in the back of my mind for a while. I grew up in a time, indeed I sat in Parliament for almost 30 years, during a time when there were certain standards. There were double standards, of course, and there was a great deal of hypocrisy. But the ruling elite had standards that they tried to keep up. Nowadays, that facade has been torn asunder. Now they're not even pretending to be honorable gentlemen and ladies. Now they're no longer pretending that their institutions, their great departments and ministries are in anything to do with contemporary politics other than an arm of the ruling party. My last word, Mehdi, I ain't no liberal, bruv. I wasn't back in 2003, and I ain't any more liberal today.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, our poll is running. A year on from the Queen's death, has King Charles filled her shoes? Yes or no? It's pretty overwhelmingly no so far, but only 11,275 people have voted, so there's plenty of time for that balance to shift. You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. Follow me on Telegram, please. On my Twitter or X, on the YouTube community poll, where 8,600 people have voted overwhelmingly that he has not, or on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on this stream, make sure you are subscribed to the channel, please. It's a simple press of a button, costs you nothing at all, helps us algorithmically. And please give the thumbs up if you're enjoying the show. And press the bell so that you know when I'm online, when I am broadcasting. And in a minute, I'll be talking to my fellow award winner. I have never been an award-winning broadcaster before. In fact, I've only won one other award as the best debater in the British Parliament, given by the Spectator magazine. Wouldn't happen now, I'm sure. And I was astonished and humbled to be awarded the SerenaShim Award for Distinguished Services in Broadcasting. SerenaShim was a very courageous journalist who was mysteriously killed in Turkey in the early days of the jihadist invasion of Syria, facilitated, funded, and armed by the big imperial powers at that time and their then Gulf satrapies. Serena was courageously reporting from the front and met her death in quite extraordinary circumstances. I was on television at the time of her demise and spoke often in support of her work and in memory of her loss. I'm now a SerenaShim award-winning broadcaster, as is my first guest, because he and I are jointly holding that prestigious award. And so I welcome Garland Nixon with a special warmth this evening. Garland, from one award winner to another, I'd like to say I've never been in better company than with you tonight, and as one of the distinguished alumni of that award. Give me a word on that, and then I'll ask you about Elon Musk, if I may.
Yes, I would like to, say that I am highly honored. I'd like to thank the many people involved, the people particularly over the Black Agenda Report and the Black Alliance for Peace, and all of the people who are involved. When we cover the news as journalists, oftentimes, we don't think of the dangers. We don't think of the reality that these powerful entities around the world are opposing us. We just say what we believe is true. And I'm always surprised when someone recognizes it or someone sees that as anything other than just, a human being feeling as though they have to say the things that are critical, and I have to expose the contradictions of empire as I see them.
Amen to that. Now, you and I have a checkered history with Elon Musk. Neither of us would describe him as our BFF, but he has made Twitter more free for most people than it was hitherto. He has refused to cooperate with the deep state more than the previous regime cooperated with them. And now his life is at risk and his businesses are under threat, including the business of Twitter itself. And the latest casus belli, or two of them, is that somehow he has facilitated a rise of anti-Semitism on the Twitter platform by not banning people like thee and me from making legitimate criticisms made, by the way, by many brave people in Israel itself of the crimes of the Netanyahu government. But most significantly, he's under real threat because he refused to allow his Starlink to facilitate a Pearl Harbor attack on the Russian Navy in Sebastopol that would almost certainly have triggered World War III. I think in these circumstances, we've got to say at least 2 cheers for Elon Musk, don't you?
Absolutely. I think that, and as you know, I'm, thrown off of Twitter right now and working towards taking action against Twitter. But I think part of the things, one of the things that people have to remember when people like you or I are still getting some level of censorship on Twitter is that it is a giant bureaucracy, and that before Elon Musk took over Twitter, it was stuffed with spooks. I mean, it's loaded with people who are former CIA and FBI and NSA, et cetera, three-letter agency people. So even if Elon Musk intends to do the right thing, they made sure that they stuffed it with people that would make it very difficult for him to do that. Additionally, another issue that Elon Musk has, as would basically any of the oligarchs now, is that there's an elimination of the line between public and private. And in order to have a major corporations and to be as powerful as Elon Musk, it is almost a requirement that you are involved with federal contracts. So he made a decision, which was a business decision, which the free marketeers tell us as a businessman he has the right to make. And there are people who are basically arguing that he should have been an arm of not just the U.S. government, but of the U.S. State Department and of a, let's face it, a fascist and very violent Ukrainian leadership. So he did the right thing. And now we are all watching neoliberalism in action, where there's a punishment for a person who does not allow their business to be a tool of the most extreme people in our government.
It is actually a definition of fascism that it becomes a corporate state where the corporations and the state machinery become one. And this is a point Glenn Greenwald was making earlier today. Where does it say anywhere in the Constitution, in the law, or in the tenets of capitalism that the owner of a private business has any kind of obligation to carry out what are effectively military orders from the government of one of the states in which his business operates? That's fascism,
And in fact, if you look at the origins of neoliberalism in the 1970s in Chile, the people who started that neoliberal project, as it were, installed a fascist leader and a fascist government because it is the nature of neoliberalism that it needs totalitarian state control. And it only makes sense that it has reverted closer and closer to its roots as people like you and I provide a platform for the average working person to question what the empire is doing, to question their so-called leaders. These leaders get angrier, and this system has to crack down on us. And I think Elon Musk is learning the hard way that maybe the system that he believed in as a so-called free market system, a system that he was very successful in and made a lot of money of, has some significant flaws, and it will turn its fangs and claws on him in a second if he refuses to adhere to the clearly fascist totalitarian aims of the U.S. empire and the Biden administration and the neocons.
I'm expecting that. Now, let's turn to the latest perambulations of your president. I don't know why he goes abroad so much. It seems to me that between his vacations and his overseas trips, it's no wonder that he hasn't visited East Palestine that he promised he would visit 6 months ago, and where thousands of people still don't have clean drinking water in his own country. Never mind a walk down Zombie Avenue in Philadelphia or LA, he is promising infrastructural developments in Africa whilst your own infrastructure crumbles. But in a way, the comic, although it might not have been funny to the Vietnamese, the comic nadir was the latest one earlier today, when he asked the Vietnamese if they remembered the film Good Morning Vietnam before bidding them a good evening Vietnam. A film about the United States genocidal mass murder of millions of Vietnamese. He made a joke out of it. It's becoming almost unbelievable. I still think we've got a way to go, but they cannot be serious, as McEnroe would say, running this guy again, a year come November, for another 4-year term, surely.
Well, I do not believe that they're going to run Joe Biden. I believe that he is unable, cognitively unable to, to go in front of crowds and to do the things he needs to do in stadiums and get people to cheer. And then he would ultimately have to debate the Republican opposition, which they're trying to throw in jail. And he's not competent to do that. So I believe they are looking for a way out for Joe Biden. And I believe that the House of Representatives impeachment inquiry will provide them the off-ramp they need for Joe Biden. But let's think about Vietnam. Where is he going to go? Is he going to go to Laos? Is he going to go to Cambodia? Again, the contradictions of the U.S. empire as whoever would represent the Biden administration tries to build their coalition against China, country after country that they go into. As I said, Laos and Cambodia, Indonesia, they go to countries that the U.S. has literally facilitated genocides in. So many countries in Asia, the U.S. has facilitated genocides in. There aren't a lot of places that we can go that won't basically get the same feelings or the same results. We can't talk about, the U.S. can't talk about the history. What about South Korea and our ally Japan? Genocide there, rape and murder, etc. So the U.S. is trying to bring together a coalition of countries that have either genocided, attacked, or oppressed another group of countries, and they're trying to bring them together against China, another country who has suffered from colonialism at the West. I think, again, the contradictions are obvious, and I believe that the Biden administration is going to have a very difficult time building their anti-China coalition simply because of the historical context. Just like in Africa, the historical context is there.
Vietnam told them bluntly during Biden's visit that they have no intention at all of joining an anti-China concert party, which I must tell you, the U.S. administration had invested some hopes that they might, because of historical enmity between China and Vietnam. Russia, the Soviet Union, was the main ally of Vietnam during that long period of struggle. But the extraterritoriality of it all doesn't boggle the minds of enough people, you know. I saw Blinken or his spokesman warning North Korea against selling weapons and ammunition to Russia. This is the same North Korea that the United States decimated almost in my lifetime, finishing in 1953. I was born in 1954. The smoke was still in the air from the 20% of people in Korea that were killed by the United States. And the United States has placed North Korea under the world's most draconian sanctions, at one point forcing the people literally to eat grass. I saw them do so. And they think they can give orders to North Korea about whom it should do business with, or even more extraordinary, Garland. The State Department accused a Chinese company of breaching sanctions by selling semiconductors made in China to another Chinese company. This was a breach of sanctions. God knows how they keep track of it all. But just ponder the chutzpah of that, Garland, threatening a Chinese company for selling Chinese products to another Chinese company.
You know, as the world looks at the Biden administration, I know at times they want to laugh and at times they want to cry because of the nuclear threat from these lunatics. But one thing is obvious: the Biden administration is holding on to a time when the United States, say the 1990s, early 2000s, when the U.S. had the economic infrastructure around the world to make these kind of demands, and that countries really had no choice other than to adhere to the demands of the U.S. empire. However, one of the reasons the U.S. is so mad at China and so angry at China and Russia is because they have provided and are building an alternative economic infrastructure that allows countries to look in a different direction. So they're living in a world that, as has been said, neurotics build castles in the sky and psychotics live in them. The Biden administration is living in a castle in the sky in which they can still tell everyone what to do. And unfortunately for the rest of the world, that castle is crumbling and there are new castles of economic infrastructure, BRICS, SCO, et cetera, that are being built. And it's not going to happen overnight, but within, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, the U.S.'s economic coercion methods will have pretty much dissipated.
Any news on Michelle Obama?
No, I'll put it like this. I will say this. One of the things that is constantly pushed is that Michelle Obama will be running for president. When we hear her name now, that's what everyone says. Are they going to go with Michelle Obama? And I don't think the system will allow her to run. If you look at the kinds of people that are allowed to run as president, it's very class-based. They're generally people who come from the top 1%. They went to Harvard or whatever, but they went to boarding schools, et cetera. Michelle Obama comes from a working class family. I believe that the people in power are concerned that at some point she could revert to her roots or that she could view the world through the context of the working class. I mean, if you go to the socialist countries, Maduro was a bus driver, Pedro Castillo was a farmer. In the socialist countries, generally, you'll see people who come from the working class. I believe that the people in the neoliberal leadership are very much afraid of the working class. And even though she's married to Barack Obama, I don't think they would take a chance. So I think that's my thoughts on Michelle Obama is all about whether or not she runs for president. And I don't see the system looking at a person of working class origins and seeing that as a viable option.
So it's a no from them. Well, from one SerenaShim award winner to another, long live her memory and long live free journalism and broadcasting in the world. Garland Nixon, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. A year on from the Queen's death, has King Charles filled her shoes? Yes or no? Get your votes in. You've got an hour or so in order to do so. Let me take a quick break and I'll be right back. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiotic isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
A very nice email from Tracy to onair@moats.tv. Hello, George. Love the blue suit. It matches your eyes. Tracy in Chelmsford. Thank you so much for that. Now, you know I really rely on the support of the people who support me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. So I prioritize messages from them. Matt Roach says, thank you for your ongoing work. I've been a fan of yours since your stance before the pathetic war hawks in the US Congress. Thank you for sticking your chin out time and time again. And on the poll, Ben, who's a MOATS graduate, which is a very prestigious level of supporter of mine on Patreon, he points out, unless Charles turns into a cute little elderly lady, I don't think he ever will. My good friend Scouser Lar, another Patreon friend too, says the king has filled the queen's shoes very well, in the sense that he too is a pointless drain on the taxpayer who does next to nothing. Ali A says shameless freeloading individuals, all of them, whilst the poor and middle class have been made poorer and poorer. These elite have turned into vampires. They are totally irrelevant to my life. And John H says Charles is a globalist WEF fool. The Queen at least held herself apart from such divisive issues. So, no. Well said. Let's go to the lines. William is in Montana on the U.S. elections. Go ahead, William.
Hello, George. I'd first like to say that you're a blessing to the world, and those that don't know that are a big part of our problem. And that's kind of leads into what I wanted to mention something about, is my dismay over the what we call elections here, more like the elections circus cycle here, to where once you see what's going on, this just makes you sick to see, here we go again, and they're up on the stage and they're waving their little flags and their banners and they're going, whatever, vote blue no matter who, and all these kind of things they're doing. And we have, it's just the ignorance of people. And I'm not a Trump fan. I've never voted Republican. As a matter of fact, I voted straight Democrat ticket for over 40 years. And I can't believe where this party has gone. It's just unbelievable to me. And I started to really open my eyes. The first Bernie run, where they cheated him right in front of everybody, and him and just the works, and said, well, that's too bad, so sad that we do what we want to do. And a person would think, well, that'll be the end of that. Something will get straightened out after that. And then you see that it just goes on, and you get to looking, that, George, this has gone on since, well, let me say, if you ask almost anybody who FDR, who's a quite famous president, who his vice president was, he had 4 terms. People would say Truman, but Wallace was the man who was closest to FDR's policies and his direction. And the same Democratic Party rigged Wallace out to put Truman in. Wallace was a lot more down to earth, leaning a little bit towards the socialist side, and I will just say that a society without some degree of socialism is not a very good society. I'll just say that in passing. But I'm just dismayed at the intentional ignorance. It's like a cult of people, and here we go again. They're going to cheer and wave the flags and say Joe is so great, but we're not going to have any debates. Nope. No sense in having primaries. Joe is our guy. And here's the guy falling downstairs, walking off stage the wrong way. Just every time he opens his mouth, if he can finish a sentence, it's something crazy. You know what I'm talking about. but it's distressing to see that there are so many people that are absolutely clueless, and they've been missing the empire building that this nation has been doing since the end of World War II. We're the bad guys since the end of World War II. I mean, sorry to say it, but all of our endeavors have kind of been to, build up the elites, the capitalist fat cats, the predatory bunch. We've stamped out more democracies. You know all this, but I'm just saying it's distressing
well, I
to
know
see
it.
these people doing it.
Yeah, I know it, William, but not everybody knows it. Not even everybody who's watching the show now. So it was an extremely powerful tour de force, drawing on your life's experience and, moreover, your historical grasp. So many people have never heard of FDR, never mind Henry Wallace, and wouldn't have known what you were talking about if you asked them who was FDR's vice president. And we're in the same situation here. I don't mean to in any way turn up my nose at the ignorance of so many tens, scores of millions of our fellow citizens. I saw people in the street being filmed the other day in New York City. You would have thought a place with a higher than average quotient of worldliness, being asked to point out Ukraine and Russia on the map, and actually 3 out of 5 of them pointed to Australia. Hardly any of them, like 5% of them, were able even remotely to place Ukraine and Russia on the map. And it would be no different in the streets of Britain, maybe 1 or 2% different, no better than that. Ditto in Australia, ditto in France and in Germany and elsewhere in Europe. That's what we're up against. But ignorance is now a choice, because if you want to, you can watch Jimmy Dore, you can watch the mother of all talk shows, you can watch Rogan, you can watch Glenn Greenwald, you can watch Garland Nixon, you can watch Jackson Hinkle, if you want to. And our task, because there's not much else we can do, our task is to evangelize for these alternative sources of analysis. Don't let a day go by without you telling someone that out there's a different point of view, because that's the only way, if there's time, and there may not be, we're going to turn our countries back from disaster. Brilliant call, William in Montana. Thank you for it. Email from Lim, L-I-M. Love your show. Keep it up. Of course, you've heard about artificial intelligence. Is that what people get from watching fake news? Too bad Americans are such wimps. We could save 1 billion people if we stopped our sick government. But will nuclear winter solve the global warming crisis? Peace out, dude. Thanks, Lim. It's a good point. People fretting about global warming appear oblivious and unconcerned about a nuclear winter lasting 1,000 years. Think about that. Michael is in Nevada on JFK, the 60th anniversary coming up. It's Michaela. I'm very glad to correct myself. Michaela in Nevada, please go ahead, ma'am.
Hello, and speaking of nuclear, big fan of yours, George. However, I do agree with Russell in Nevada that it was the Israeli Mossad at the behest of David Ben-Gurion that took out Kennedy over their nuclear weapons program. Just wanted to say that statement, sir. Done a lot of research, and I think you should too. It's an honor. You should keep up the good fight, like always. And, one quick thing. I was looking into Meyer Lansky ordered, or rather sanctioned, a hit on one of your very own, Freddie Mills, a professional boxer. you should really look into that case, sir. It's a sad case. But you have a great day. And,
well, I
keep
will.
up the good fight, like I said.
Thank you, Michaela. Thanks for that. Wow, I haven't heard that one before. Freddie Mills, my good friend Shen is probably looking it up right this minute, because Freddie Mills was quite a British champion. I doubt if in 1963 it was either possible or, more importantly, necessary for the Mossad to be enlisted to murder the President of the United States. I think it's becoming more and more obvious that the US state and perhaps organized crime was intimately and intricately coordinating with each other in that murder, most foul, on Elm Street in November of 1963. We are going to have a special program on it, Michaela, and no doubt we can hear all kinds of theories on that night. I don't set my face against them for any other reason than practicality. It looks to me, if something looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, why go looking elsewhere for a duck? You've got a duck in front of you. In 1963, the Mossad was a pale shadow of what it later became. I just watched a documentary last night in the murder spree carried out by Mossad across Europe in the 1970s, in which all manner of people were murdered in cold blood by Mossad on, in some cases, a pretext. In one case in particular, I know for certain a pretext. The pretext being their alleged involvement in the Munich Olympic Games terrorist operation, which led to a lot of dead people on the tarmac at the hands of the German police in 1972 in the so-called Happy Olympics. All kinds of people were murdered, allegedly in retaliation for what happened at Munich. And in most cases, the allegation of involvement was completely and utterly fatuous, false, and knowingly false. They took the opportunity of wrapping themselves in the shroud of those poor athletes to go after people that they wanted to murder in the first place, not because those people had committed a terrorist act, but because those people had a poet's tongue and a poet's pen and were making progress internationally. Abu Hassan Salami, for example, he was killed because the Americans loved him. The CIA loved him. They saw him as a potential channel, a backdoor to President Arafat. Ali Hassan Salami was never, ever seen with a gun in his hand. He was a diplomat. He was at Arafat's right hand, always. He was a guest of the CIA at Disneyland in California on his honeymoon with Georgina Rizk, the beauty queen, former Miss Universe, whom he had just wed. He wasn't involved in Black September or the killing of the Israeli athletes in Munich. He was murdered because he had good relations with the United States, which was at that time seeking to warm up its relations with Israel's enemies, as any sane country following a sane diplomatic path would do. So I'm not at all suggesting that Mossad would not have murdered Jack Kennedy. I suppose if I'm saying anything, I'm saying it was not in any way necessary to involve them. And as you know, you alluded to it in the beginning of your call, I'm always suspicious of people who always want to blame the Jews, because that's what they really mean. Because I've met such people. I know the mindset of such people. I'm ready to blame Israel for anything that they do, but I'm not ready to form a mindset of automaticity, of imagining that anything bad that happens in the world happens because of them. I'm there. That's me. What can I say? Except I'm going to take a 1-minute break, and then I'll be back with another great guest and your calls all the way to the end of the show. Stay tuned.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As vicious as the Twitter sphere, where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, get your calls in early, because I expect this to be a very busy second hour. If you're in the UK or Ireland, it's free of charge. 08081 96 5522. That's 08081 96 5522. If you're in the US or Canada, again, it's toll free. It's +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. Now, the revolutionary government in Niger, not to be confused with the far from revolutionary government next door in Nigeria, showed what you can do if you even begin to demand fairness from your former colonial overlords. Niger is quite happy to go on selling uranium to France, but not at the 80 cents per kilogram that it used to. France will now have to pay 200 euros per kilogram if it wants to keep doing business with Niger. Now, that's only a first step. We have to be sure that the new riches which flow into the Niger treasury are fairly and wisely and efficiently distributed throughout the country amongst the masses on infrastructure and the rest. That is another matter. But it's a hell of a blow to French globalized capital, which is facing one rebuff after another. But not enough people in Africa are paying attention to the even bigger elephant in this particular room. I refer to the United States of America. Now, all eyes were on the judiciary in Nigeria over these last few weeks. I myself played a very small part, but a part nonetheless, in focusing eyes that would not hitherto have been waiting on the outcome of a decision of a court in Nigeria. All eyes were on the judiciary because it turned out that the ultimate American Manchurian candidate was somehow placed in the presidency of Africa's most populous country, most rich country. He was the ultimate Manchurian candidate because the Americans knew everything about his past as a bagman to the drug mobs in the city of Chicago. They even confiscated $500,000 from him in his days on the street, washing money, carrying money for the drug barons, the gang bosses in gangland, Chicago, Illinois. So who better to have as the president of Africa's most populous country at a time of swirling change on the continent than a man who literally depends for his very life on you? And that is the state of affairs, where the illegitimate president, Tinubu, has been fraudulently imposed on the people of Nigeria, and all eyes were on the judiciary. Surely the courts would see sense and send the bagman on his way. Did it work out that way? Well, let's hear from the horse's mouth. Nigeria's young and best correspondent, analyst, and commentator, David Hundeyin, joins us here again on the mother of all talk shows. Well, all eyes were on the judiciary, David. How did it work out?
Not very well, because as is now abundantly clear, the judiciary, as it's generously referred to, signaled to the world and to Nigeria specifically that even the letter of the law, the Nigerian constitution itself, is essentially a series of suggestions that basically, in the interests of protecting the status quo, the judiciary will essentially make up rules that don't exist on the fly. They will nitpick technicalities which make very little sense to anyone, both within and outside the system. And they will basically work their way back from a predetermined answer to basically to arrive at a series of contrived questions. And the only purpose of doing all of this is to subvert justice. So what is abundantly clear now is that even going forward, even after this inevitably goes to the Supreme Court, the outcome isn't going to be any different, because the Nigerian judiciary has made a mockery of itself. Just to give you an idea of just how much of a mockery that we're talking about now. Some of the judgments, the rulings that were pronounced on the day were that, for example, on the issue of the supposed president's drug dealing forfeiture in the United States, where, as you mentioned earlier, he forfeited the sum of $460,000 to the U.S. government, being proceeds of heroin trafficking. The ruling completely sidestepped this issue, made no attempt to engage with that whatsoever, and instead referred to a letter which was supposedly written from the U.S. Embassy to the Nigerian Inspector General of Police in 2003, supposedly clearing somebody known as Bola Ahmad Tinubu of any sort of criminal records in the U.S. Meanwhile, the person who is sitting as the president, his name is Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So, and if you know anything about law, you would know that such a thing isn't a simple typo, right? It's a whole different person that was requested. The details of a whole different person were requested, and obviously they got back the answer they were looking for, which is obviously, there is no such thing, because no such person exists. And that's what the supposed judiciary relied on 20 years later in 2023 to basically pronounce him innocent. The judgment said, based on that letter, he had no case, and that the forfeiture is a civil matter. It's not a criminal matter, so it's fine. That's what the supposed Chief Justice of the Nigerian Appeal Courts ruled. So what has become abundantly clear is that, as it stands, Nigeria has no law. Nigeria has a series of written and codified suggestions, but anything and everything, depending on how much money you have, depending on how much influence you have, anything and everything will be allowed to stand up in court, no matter how stupid, no matter how fatuous the argument is. Everything can fly. Nigeria essentially is no longer a country under law. Nigeria was never a particularly lawful society to begin with, but this, I think, has driven the final nail into the coffin. As I said, shortly after the ruling was put out, as it stands now, if I stand in the middle of the road in front of a TV broadcast camera and I'm holding a gun and I shoot people dead, and this is broadcast to millions of people in 4K UHD quality, I will be fine because I can go to court now. One of the rulings that was given, for example, was that the vice presidential candidate, who was actually not eligible to run because he had been registered as a contestant for another political office concurrently, which is illegal. The ruling given was that, as long he didn't do it intentionally, so it's fine. So essentially now what that means is the maxim which any lawyer anywhere in the world is raised with, which is that ignorance is no excuse under the law, has for the first time been turned on its head in Nigeria by the appeal court. So essentially, as I said, if I shoot a bunch of people dead in the streets in front of a TV camera, my argument in court can be I didn't do it intentionally, so I'm free to go. Another ruling that was given was that, the drug dealing forfeiture, the entity involved was the president's bank accounts and not the president's person. So the president's bank accounts forfeited the money.
That's the one. That one actually made me laugh out loud. The judges said that the money that was forfeited was a criminal, not the person who had the money in his bank account. In other words, it was these naughty $460,000 that are deserved of condemnation, not the person who had them resting in his account. To continue your analogy, you could claim that all these people you shot were not shot by you, they were shot by the gun.
Exactly. And apparently that would fly because that's the depth that we sunk to in the year 2023. So at this point, I think it's become clear now that if we're hoping for any kind of redemption from within the Nigerian system, it's probably not going to happen. At this point, I think it's the Nigerian people themselves, if they have any fight at all left in them, that have to look at what their contemporaries across the border in Niger have done and basically make up their minds. Are we going to consent to be mocked in this manner permanently, or are we going to do something and stand up for ourselves? Currently, there's a sort of mass paralysis sort of going around where everyone is like, oh, if you go out, they're going to shoot us dead in the streets, which they did 3 years ago. There's going to be a massacre and blah, blah, blah. And, you shouldn't be sitting in the UK or wherever you are telling people to go out on the streets. Why don't you come home and lead the protest yourself? Which, I've done that already before. But anyway, apparently I'm expected to come back and, to do that again. And generally, it just seems to me as if, I think until the people themselves decide that they have had enough, this mockery is going to continue because clearly Tinubu himself has no intention of letting go. He clearly has no iota of shame, personal embarrassment, anything like that. He genuinely doesn't care. And the judiciary has also made it clear that they are just as shameless as he is. So essentially, the entire Nigerian establishment has made it very clear that it lacks a single modicum of shame, that it is willing to do anything in public. If you watch the proceedings, you'd have seen toward the end, there was I think the only female justice on the panel. She actually she raised her voice and went into a rant and was screaming at the petitioners and essentially berating them for bringing up the petition, and was basically saying things like, did you think that threats from social media would move us to give another judgment? And it was almost as if Tinubu himself was speaking to the petitioners, and this is a judge. So it's become clear that the Nigerian system, if there is no Nigerian system, it's been completely captured. So the Nigerian people themselves at this point need to decide if they're going to consent to be led by their inferiors, or if they're going to do something about it. Ultimately, I don't think there's it's a decision for a journalist or for a politician like Peter Obi to make. I think it's the Nigerian people themselves who have to make that decision, if they ever make that decision.
Going to the Supreme Court now is just kicking it all into the long grass, isn't it? It's just putting it off for another 12 months.
It's not even going to be up to 12 months. I think it's like, just because I think the rule is that 60 days from the ruling, which was this past week, is the deadline for a verdict from the Supreme Court. So we're looking at sometime in November potentially. But yes, I definitely think the Supreme Court, I actually think the Supreme Court is even less likely to deliver a sensible verdict than the appeal court, because the Chief Justice of the Federation, by the way, his name is Kayode Ariwoola. He is actually a very close ally and a personal friend of Bola Tinubu himself. And the rumor has it that he was actually placed in that position due to lobbying from Tinubu back when Buhari was the president. So I think anyone expecting a sensible verdict from Tinubu's close personal ally is not being realistic. I don't think it's going to happen. I think there's going to be an even bigger mockery at the Supreme Court. What I am looking forward to, however, is seeing what his ruling on the forfeiture would be. And why I'm looking forward to it is that in 2014, this exact Justice Kayode Ariwoola delivered a ruling, which has been circulated very widely, a ruling stating that forfeiture is itself the act of forfeiture after the commission of a crime constitutes in itself some form of criminal conviction, and that forfeiture is proof of criminal activity. That was a ruling that he delivered. So I'm looking forward to seeing him essentially roll back his own earlier ruling and state that forfeiture is something else now, that, okay, it's the bank accounts that are responsible and not the individual. I'm looking forward to him doing that. I know he will do that because clearly the Nigerian judges have no shame. He's definitely going to do that, right? I completely expect him to do that, but I want to get it on camera. So which is why I said I'm really looking forward to doing that. It's going to be like a seminal moment in Nigerian history, the point when it became clear to everyone that from the mouth of the Chief Justice of the Federation that Nigeria has no law. It's not a free-for-all. Everybody go outside and do whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter anyway. We're looking forward to that.
Nigeria, Nigeria is a great country. Its people, great people, and so numerous, so populous, so hardworking, so prosperous. But they've never produced a political leader of the stature of some of these smaller, poorer African countries. Why do you think that is?
I think that's because the manner in which Nigeria came to be and in which it came to gain its independence was remarkably different from its neighbors, for example. So Ghana, for example, there was your conventional sort of anti-colonial independence struggle, and then there was this sort of charismatic leader that came up out of that struggle, a guy called Kwame Nkrumah, who remains a sort of legendary figure in Ghana till today, even though he's long dead. And the country sort of coalesced around a common vision for what an independent future looks like. In Nigeria, there was no such thing. It might surprise you to know that I think the year was 1955, when the motion for independence was first moved in the then Nigerian House of Parliament, fully half of the country actually opposed the motion. That might sound surprising to anyone who is familiar with African post-colonial history. Why on earth would members of an African parliament oppose independence? But that's the very sort of peculiar makeup of Nigeria, that the way it was put together. I'm not a fan of blaming the British for things that they did 60, 100 years ago. But unfortunately, that's just the reality, that the way Nigeria was put together by the British made it such that there was a very deliberate power imbalance between ethnicities which had almost sort of equal population. So it was sort of like the classic divide and rule thing. So instead of having a country where maybe there's a clear majority and people can sort of coalesce around a shared vision, or, even if it's equally sized groups, they were sort of left to sort of figure it out on their own. Instead, these three groups were sort of pit against each other by the British, which is like the classic empire building way of doing things, so that you get to remain in charge because these three idiots are fighting themselves. That's how Nigeria was put together by the Brits, unfortunately. And all these years later, unfortunately, Nigeria still pretty much remains very much the way it was in the 60s, whereby even though Nigeria has close to 500 plus ethnic groups, there are like basically three majority populations, and they essentially, till today, remain at loggerheads. They're not really able to agree on anything economically, politically. So the country remains sort of in a de facto state of war, which is why every time there's an election, people die, because it's actual ethnic warfare every time it's time to select a new leader. Part of the reason why Peter Obi's candidacy was such a phenomenon was because he comes from the Igbo ethnic group, which for if you're familiar with the Civil War history, rightly or wrongly, Nigeria's first ever military coup in 1966 was labeled as an Igbo coup. And as a result of that, the Igbos were deliberately politically sidelined for many decades in the Nigerian political mainstream. There's never been an Igbo head of state since 1966. And he seemed to come out of nowhere. And for the young people of Nigeria, people like myself who we never experienced a civil war. We never grew up in that era. I was born in 1990. This was ancient history by the time I was born. We just saw a competent administrator who could be a good leader. But for the people from older generations, there are all these issues which still exist in their minds, which continue to be a factor in the political equation. So for some people, it was, he comes from this part of the country, so under no circumstances must he, get into that seat. So there's all sorts of complications, making it such that it's very difficult for Nigeria as a country to sort of evolve a common vision for what it even imagines Nigeria should look like in the future. So if you ask someone, I'm from Lagos, it's in the southwest, the largest city in Nigeria. So if you had to ask me what my vision for Nigeria ideally should be over the next 30 to 50 years, I could spend an hour talking about things that I would like to see, certain types of infrastructure investments, and how, the sectors that the government should focus on, direct investment that should be made in education and healthcare, changes in law. I could tell you all of these things. But if you ask someone in Kano, which is in the northwest, what's their vision for Nigeria in the next 30, 50 years, they'll tell you something completely different, because they come from a completely different context where the primary consideration is, for many of them, the religion, which is a particularly conservative form of Islam, which, by and large, doesn't tend to coexist well with its neighbors. So there are those issues. If you had asked someone from Onitsha, which is in the southeast, what's their vision for Nigeria, they'll probably give you a different answer as well. So Nigeria is essentially 3 or 4 countries struggling to fight each other, but it's one sort of nation state. So internally, it's never really worked. Externally, obviously, the world only sees a bunch of Africans from West Africa. We're all one nationality. We all carry one green passport. Internally, it's a lot more complicated. So unless there's a significant sort of social and mental revolution that takes place, whereby the young people who are by far the majority of the country's population, as much as 70% of the country's population, decide that they want a break from the past, and that whatever the British did or didn't do, whatever the Ahmadu Bellos and the Ojukus, whatever happened between the 1950s and the 1970s, all of that doesn't concern us now, because we live in 2023. Our lives are a certain way now. We want to move forward into the future, and this is what we want. Until that happens, it's going to be very unlikely that Nigeria will coalesce around a sort of charismatic figure, sort of Lee Kuan Yew or Kwame Nkrumah or Nelson Mandela. It's unlikely. It's not impossible, because we've seen the emergence of Peter Obi, which was not supposed to happen. So I think we're already seeing the green shoots, some sort of hope. However, as I said earlier, it's up to the young Nigerians themselves to take this to the end, because I think we've used the system as far as the system is willing to let us take it to. We're told after the protest movement, we're told, don't protest, go, form yourselves into a political formation, line up behind the candidate. We've done that, and we actually won the election. And the result was taken from us. We went to court, which is what you were supposed to do. And the court has ruled that, well, it's the gun that shot the people, not the person holding it. So at this point, I think it's the Nigerians themselves who then have to look at the situation and say, okay, we've done everything we're supposed to do. We've played by the rules, and clearly the rules are not designed to work. So now we have to work outside the rule. We have to rebel against the system, because the system is designed to keep us in a certain way. So until they make that decision, we will keep on having this conversation, unfortunately.
Well, keep us informed, and I wish you the very best, and the peoples of Nigeria the very best. Thank you, David Hundeyin, for your expert testimony. Keep an eye on the judiciary. Turned out to be a bit of a waste of time. You can vote on the poll for another 10 minutes or so. And I'm going to take a quick break, and then it's your show all the way to the end. Stay tuned.
As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out, pallid green, and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire.
Well, I just took a call from my son there in that very short break, who's very excited that it is Ireland 1, Netherlands 1. His mother was born in the Netherlands, and he's at least a quarter Irish, so I'm not sure who he's supporting. I had to hang up before I got to that. But it looks like it's a terrific game. Watch the highlights later. Now, it was very important and rather exciting fringe meeting taking place very shortly in Liverpool, in the great city of Liverpool. It's a fringe meeting of the Trade Union Congress. For younger viewers, that is the umbrella organisation of Britain's once mighty trade unions. And great speakers, my former parliamentary colleague Chris Williamson, and two legends of the British trade union movement, Andy Hudd and Tosh MacDonald, both from the train drivers union ASLEF, and my colleague Lauren Wilson. So register online for that. It is a Workers' Party meeting. You don't have to be at the TUC or even a trade unionist to go along to it. If you're interested in trade unions and in the situation of the working class in Britain, go along to that meeting if you're in the Liverpool area. So, an email from Naila. Tomorrow would be the anniversary of 9/11, which has been the start of all terrorist attacks. We should remember those who have passed away in that attack, risking their lives for the sake of their so-called government that has destroyed the towers, doing both by crashing the planes and destroying the towers. What would be the message from them on George? Well, I don't actually accept a couple of the premise within that, but we will be looking at 9/11 in the show on Wednesday, so stay tuned for that. Simi is in Gosport in England, but on Nigeria. Simi, go ahead.
Thanks a lot, George. I've been a regular viewer of your show for many years. I just wanted to say,
thank you.
I just wanted to say, with regards to Nigeria, we need to be quite careful about it. Because, indeed, there were some discrepancies in the last election, but it's not enough to say who won or who did not win. I would just like to say opposition to the current president has led to a lot of spike of violence against his ethnic group, the Yoruba people. And this is where we need to be careful as to how people frame the problems they have with the president. Because at the moment, if care is not taken, the way a lot of independent journalists, so to say, are framing these things up, it might lead to another brutal ethnic clash. And as you know, my country experienced a civil war in 1967 between the then breakaway Biafra region and the rest of the country. I'm afraid we might be heading in that direction again. So I would like you to please take a step back and actually review the dynamics to the last election. Because we can't say for sure that Peter Obi won that election. A lot of, we do vote on the basis of religion and ethnicity, but most Nigerians are Muslims, and we voted for Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Whatever problems people have with him is fair, but he's the person most of us voted for. And I think the more people are going after him on a personal level as against going for INEC, which is the body responsible for elections, civilians from my ethnic group are being targeted. And I just called because I've seen a lot of conversations surrounding him, and I want you to be aware of the risk he poses on the ground. Thank you.
Well, look, there's no question of me taking a step back. I'm merely hosting a show in which all kinds of people are invited. Every 5 minutes, I invite everyone to call the show to give their point of view. And you just have, very succinctly indeed, you have taught me something. I had absolutely no idea that Tinubu was from the Yoruba people. That's the only good thing about him. And my contempt for him has zero to do with the fact that he's a Muslim and zero to do with the fact that he comes from the Yoruba people. These two things are the only two good things about him. I'm against him because he's a crook. I'm against him because he's a thief. I'm against him because he's a bagman for the bigger thieves. In Chicago, Illinois, I'm against him because he forged his election papers. I'm against him because INEC forged his victory in the election. Am I supposed to turn a blind eye to all these things? Because he's a Muslim, because he's a Yoruba, because this may lead to ill feeling to his people? When I express my contempt for Rishi Sunak, I'm not hating on Indian Hindus. I'm hating on Rishi Sunak for everything except the fact that he's an Indian Hindu. I parked that. I have no interest in that. I'm against Sunak for a whole range of other reasons. I'm against Tinubu for a whole range of other issues. Now, I invite all points of view to enter this debate over Nigeria. If we had a MOATS Africa, we could do it exclusively every week on that show tailor-made for the African audience. But we don't have that, so we can't talk about Nigeria every single week, every single show. But we had David on in advance of the court decision. We've now had him on after the court decision, which I followed closely, and which was every bit as farcical as David Hundeyin described it. What are we supposed to do? Not do so? Accept that the greatest African country is run by a crook? A forger? No, I will never accept that. I have too much respect for all the peoples of Nigeria than to remain stum about electoral fraud and grand larceny on such a scale. But if you have a different view, you are welcome at any length to call this show anytime and put that point of view across. Email from Tony. George, I've sent you a tenner for this question. Thank you for non-English speakers. That's a £10 note. It says, was it not written into the original Labour manifesto that the monarchy be abolished? Love the show, Tony. Well, I don't know if it was. And I don't know when that original manifesto would be. Are you talking about the first manifesto in 1912? Are you talking about the one that put Labour in power in 1922? I doubt it. The abolition of the monarchy, I doubt if that was in their manifesto, but in any case, it's of merely historical curiosity value. Because this so-called Labour Party doesn't even recognize a word, jot or tittle of the manifesto they fought the election on just 3 years ago. Even though Sir Kid Starver, ran for the Labour leadership, bowing his head in respect to that manifesto and making 10 pledges, every single one of which he has broken since becoming leader. But thanks very much for the donation. You can donate on the YouTube talk mechanism. I forget what it's called now. And I'm grateful, super chat mechanism. And I'm grateful to you for it. The most efficient way to support me is through supporting my Patreon, where for the price of a cup of tea per week in the cheapest cafe, you can support my work and indeed my family. Rahul is on the line from Bordeaux on generism. I don't know what that means. Let's hear from Rahul. Go ahead, Rahul.
Oh, hello, George. Hi. It's not actually really about genderism, although I think you identify it as genderism. I have run to defend a trend that I think I hear you criticising, which is a trend in government literature and in things that we read generally, of avoiding identifying the sex of the person that you are talking about. I hear you talk about, I hear you rail against referring to females as people with vaginas. And I mean, girls and women are people with vaginas, so I think it's absolutely fine. And I don't think I agree with you that it's a sign of people being obsessed with sex. I think it's the opposite. I think it's quite a positive development. The equality of opportunity for the sexes was enshrined as far as employment law is concerned in the UK in the 1960s by legislation. And there were a lot of changes since then in the 1970s and the 1980s in the way people used language in the UK when they were talking about work that reflected that people are equal. People stopped using he as a pronoun when they meant to refer to people in general, and they started saying he or she, and then they started saying they. People stopped saying headmasters when they were referring to head teachers, and they started saying headmasters and headmistresses, or they said head teachers. They stopped saying chairman, and they started saying chairmen and chairwomen or chairperson. So the language that you are criticising is surely just an extension of that, and I see it as a very positive development. If you believe that the sexes are equal, why do you want to identify the sex of a person unless you're talking about something where sex is actually important? It could be sport, it could be medical treatment, it could be a dating website for heterosexuals. But apart from those isolated incidences, if the sexes are equal, you don't need to identify a person's sex generally. So I think it's very positive, and I have always found it quite strange that we do actually always identify a person by their sex. Your staff appear to have identified my call as genderism, which is interesting because I think it's true that this practice that you don't like may be a byproduct of this bizarre trans word, which I don't understand for a moment. I believe that there are only two sexes, and I don't understand what a trans person means. But in terms of this move towards language where we don't automatically identify the sex of a person, well, what's wrong with it? I think it's quite, I think it's a sign that we believe in the equality of all human beings.
Well, of course, I'll let you speak at length, and I'm grateful that you did so. And I suspect that we have a profoundly different take on these things, and that's fine. That's what a university of the airwaves is supposed to be about. So I'll let you back in after I've finished dealing seriatim as well as I'm able at this hour with the points that you made. I am a man. I'm a father and a husband, and I'm a son, and I have a mother, and I have a father. And my mother gave birth to me as every person on the planet's mother gave birth to them. There are 8,644,168,000 people alive this day, and every single one of them was given birth to by a woman. So if I agree to the abolition of words like mother, of words like woman, then I am discriminating against women. I am diminishing the sacred importance of women. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women. 10 years ago, the women in my family had the right to go into a woman's changing room unmolested by a man dressed as a woman, exposing himself in front of them. Perfectly legally, it would appear. Either in Primark, or in a swimming pool, or in a ladies' toilet. What's wrong with having a ladies' toilet? That was a right that women won, which is now being taken away from them. Why can't we have a recognition of women, a definition of women as adult human females who have rights as adult human females? And one of those rights, or part of those rights, is that they not be blamanged in favor of gender-neutral language, which just coincidentally negates them, scrubs their name off the billboard, off the poster, off the title. Why should we go into that? Last word to you, Rahul.
Okay, I think what you're saying is a fallacy. As I've said, if we say head teachers, we have effaced both headmaster and headmistress. So I don't really see how you can object. You're talking about something completely different.
Well, but only women. No. Let me stop you, and then I'll let you back in. This is a debate. Only women give birth. Only women give birth or have ever given birth. So why should we scrub gender? Why should we scrub gender out of the business of giving birth to children?
No, you can keep it in that context because that's a context where sex is relevant. This is where I disagree with you. I'm quite happy if you want to have toilets reserved for only women and only men, which is what I'm used to. I'm in my 50s. I don't like the idea of unisex toilets very much. But I'm saying I think you're confusing it. And I actually think, I don't know what has brought this trend about. It certainly seems to be a byproduct of whatever this transgender nonsense is. But I think it's a positive one. I don't see any difference between what you're objecting to and people saying head teachers instead of saying headmasters and headmistresses. Of course, if you want...
But there's every difference. No, look, there's every difference. The head teacher can be a woman or a man. Therefore, head teacher is entirely appropriate. But the woman in the labour ward can only be a woman. That's the difference.
That's right. She's a person with a vagina, as are all girls and women. I just think in that context, you can, if you want, say women. I'm just saying I don't have a problem with people want to say people with vaginas because it includes both women and men.
If I want, what, men have vaginas?
No, of course they don't.
Exactly. So you're making a distinction without a difference. I'm saying where things are exclusive. No, you are. There are things, and you've acknowledged them, where there are men and where there are women. There are women who give birth. There are no men who give birth. Ergo, it's entirely correct and entirely wrong to erase the specifically female character of giving birth.
Yeah, you need a vagina to do that.
Your child nourishment. You give your children, your baby, nourishment from your breast. You are a woman who is breastfeeding, not someone who is chest feeding. Do you get my drift?
Not really. I don't see why you can't say, I agree with you, you need breasts to breastfeed, you need breasts to chest feed. Okay, I agree perhaps chest feed is perhaps absurd, but I was just talking about the women, the people with vagina, which in fact is more accurate than women because it includes girls. So I just think it's a positive thing, and you're mixing up the toilet thing and the sports thing with something else. That's all.
This is sophistry. I wish I could develop this debate with you. I hope you'll call back, Rahul, so that we can continue this argument another day. In Bordeaux, that was Rahul. Tell me what you think of what she had to say. On YouTube, Abel Malcolm says George Galloway and Garland Nixon and Jackson Hinkle and Jimmy Dore and Danny Haifong and Kim Iverson are my absolute favourite YouTubers. Thank you so much for that. Captain Blimp says, never mind JFK. Where's the list of Epstein Island visitors? Indeed. Let's go to Lincoln in England and talk to Prince about the Nigerian elections. Go ahead, Prince.
Oh, hi, Gigi. Thank you very much for giving me another opportunity today.
Always.
There's always a thing or two to learn from your platform, and we are blessed to have you in good health and coming on our way all the time with these fascinating stories. Quickly to the Nigerian election tribunal's ruling. Rightly put by David, I think this is not just a slap in the face of democracy, but clearly the ruling itself is an extreme aberration of rule of law. And I am just wondering, because I watched the ruling, and sometimes some of the reasons that the judges were giving to dismiss some of the petitions just sounds very ridiculous. And of course, you see, Gigi, the problem of Africa, most post-colonial states, just like, in African countries, have, these gerontocratic and autogenarian leaders. But this sort of leadership is not only, very akin to African countries. In the U.S., as you clearly have even stated, we have a president that clearly cannot even remember sometimes some of the things that he does on stage. But the real problem about Africa is the institutions that enable the leaders, these gerontocratic leaders, to continue to, stay in power irrespective of, the protest from and the citizens. Clearly, if you listen to the judgment that was given by the Nigerian tribunal on some of the issues, you cannot just help than to just laugh, because some of the reasons they were using even Wikipedia to even write off a strong constitutional provision in the Nigerian constitution, and I just can't help it. And of course, if you look at how event has played out, clearly this is a judgment that has been choreographed. It is something that has already been rehearsed before the judges themselves came to give the verdict. Because if a president's legitimacy is being challenged, and the president knows that the judiciary has the potential to overturn the decision of the election that brought him into power, he will stay in the country to make sure that the decision is given. But as we have seen in the Nigerian case, and clearly as you probably is aware, the Nigerian president left the country to India the day even before the decision was given. So this is somebody probably who is even aware of the decision even before he traveled. Maybe probably just told him that you can just travel and that nothing is going to happen. So clearly, and Nigeria being the most populous country in Africa, if they cannot get these things right, how will the smaller states be able to get these things right? So clearly,
actually, the smaller states are showing the way, and indeed in the neighborhood. Prince, I'm sorry to cut you short because there are a lot of people trying to get through and only 8 minutes left. Your point was very strong. In fact, I laughed at the judgment, but if I'd been a Nigerian, I'm pretty sure I would have cried. Thanks, Prince, in Lincoln. There's a caller on the line from Moscow. Alexander on the line. Just been to Donbass. I don't know who Alexander is or whether I'm committing any kind of offense in talking to him, but I'm going to do it anyway. Alexander, welcome to the mother of all talk shows.
Hello, sir.
Tell us, you've just been to Donbass. In what capacity?
Well, I've actually studied in Washington, D.C., interned in U.S. Congress, and then being a Russian, I declined U.S. citizenship, came back to Russia, and since 2014, I have been going to Donbass, trying to, spread the word about this, the war that's been going on, not since 2022, but since 2014, since the illegal coup in Kiev. And a friend of mine, an American citizen who has lived in Crimea for decades, has suggested that I talk to you and try to let your viewers and listeners know about what is actually going on the ground down there.
You're quite a find, someone from your background who's Russian but knows the United States and is in the theater of operations, or just has been, is definitely a find for us. So I'm glad that you called, and thanks to your friend in the Crimea. What did you find that you would like to tell us on your most recent visit?
Well, being a Russian citizen, as I said, I've studied in the States. My mother is actually from Donbass, so my family, my mother's side of the family, has lived there for decades, all being labeled in Soviet passports as Ukrainian, but all Russian speakers. And what happened was when the war began in 2014, some of them were on the side that with the separatists, and some of them were on the side that was under Ukraine. And when I went there recently, I went to the towns that, Russia conquered, or as they think that Russia liberated. And honestly, I have never heard more praise towards the Russian soldiers than in those areas of Ukraine that recently came under Russian control. People there for 8 years. They lived in situations. This is a story that I was told by a doctor who is a good friend of mine back in 2014. Azov Battalion, the obviously absolutely not Nazis, but they have a Nazi symbol on them. They were stationed in the town, and they got drunk and decided to have some joyriding in the city. Crashed headfirst into a car with civilians, killed an entire family. What happened then was this person, the captain of the Azov Battalion, was taken to this friend of mine who's a surgeon in the city. And they did their best to save him, but he had to be transported by helicopter to Kiev later. And what they told us is that a few days later, on Ukrainian TV, they saw him being buried with heroes in a heroic ceremony, fighting the evil Russians. This is a guy who stole a car, got drunk, killed a family, and this is how they presented them. And these are the stories I've heard multiple times over there. It's tragic what has been going on, because these people have been living in fear for the last 8 years, and they have to live in even more fear now, because when Ukraine started pushing back a year ago, because they're Russian speakers, they're ethnic Russians, they fear that they will just be ethnically cleansed. So that's one story I can tell you from actually being there and hearing it.
It's actually the only story we'll have time for tonight, but make sure we know how to reach you, Alexander. I would very much like to hear from you in subsequent shows at more length. I need to clear the lines. It's not everybody, in fact, it's hardly anybody who gets to celebrate their 62nd wedding anniversary. But our legend, Norma, in Bristol, is doing just that. Happy anniversary, Norma, from everybody at the Mother of All Talk Shows, and I'm sure everybody in our worldwide audience, all praying that the two of you can spend more time together after your recent health travails. Happy anniversary to you.
Thank you, George. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Oh, good.
Yes.
No, actually, thank you very much. But the thing is, our future together is really in the balance, because it's a case of wait and see. Big decisions are going to have to be made soon, and we don't know what on earth is going to happen. But we did, I did take a tiny little bottle of wine in to the hospital yesterday, but the nurses wouldn't let us have it, so I just had to give him a big kiss instead.
Well, I'd rather have a big kiss than a bottle of wine, but then I don't drink alcohol. But the situation is that he's in hospital, you're at home, you're not able to look after him if and when they let him come home. And have you explored all possible avenues of help in the house?
All possible avenues of what?
Help.
Yes, but you see, he cannot walk. He has so many things wrong with him. So he's going to go to, not the moment, but rehabilitation place. It's like a hospital, to see if they can get him to walk. If they can't, I can't look after him. But, George, I do think this is funny. I know it's not funny. My situation has been very stressed. But somebody did say earlier about, they quoted a cute little elderly lady. I'm thinking about what that other lady
about the
said
Queen.
Well, maybe it was, yeah. But I think this is me, a cute little sad elderly lady at the moment. Not funny, I know, but that's why.
Well, there you go. There you go. Well, God bless you and your husband, and may you celebrate further anniversaries, even though 62 is a very historic number indeed, as is 2100 hours. Alas, that's all that I've got time for. There's much that I would like to say, but the further I run on the show, the more money it's going to cost me, and I know you wouldn't want that. But the good news is, God willing, I'll be back on Wednesday for the midweek Mother of All Talk shows at the slightly later hour of 9 p.m. So the task for each and every one of you is to get an additional viewer. Just think, do the maths. The people who are watching, they all bring one more viewer. Just think, we'd be knocking so-called mainstream media deeper and deeper into a cocked hat. Thanks for watching. Good night.